Good afternoon. My name is Trott. I am the founder of DIA, Diasporic Images of Africa, and as you know, we are celebrating Latino/Hispanic History Month. This month, my theme is the influence of Latin music, but more specifically, the influence of Latin jazz. Latin music, as you know, is a very broad topic. It covers, matter of fact, let's talk about where is Latin America. Latin America, of course, as you know, starts at the southern Gulf Coast of the United States, Rio Grande, and moves southward. It includes the entire Caribbean islands. It includes Mexico and all countries going south into Central and South America. So when we say Latinos, or Latin America, we are talking about those people. But as you know, in the Caribbean, we have English speakers, we have French speakers, we have Dutch speakers, we have the Portuguese down in South America by way of Brazil. They are not Latino, they are not Hispanic, I'm sorry, but they are Latino, okay? So, as I said, we're going to be listening to 6 different musicians talk about how they feel the influence Latin jazz has had on United States culture. We will also be talking a little bit about a dear legend, Charlie Palmieri, who passed recently, and we will and we'll just go from there. But I must remind you that everyone has gotten one of these fact packs. As you see, the theme for this month is on it. Inside, I have each of the musicians here. As I said, Eddie Palmieri is here. There's a write-up about him. There's a write-up about Chucho Valdez. There is a write-up about Africando. Africando, of course, is a musical group out of the continent of Africa, most of whom, well, the originators were Senegalese and Congolese. They have had a turnover, but their main claim to fame for me is they do Latino or Latin jazz like no one I know, coming off the continent of Africa. And then, of course, we have Buika. Concha Buika. She, by the way, is Spanish. All right. Now, as you know, many of us, when we see someone who is speaking Spanish, they may not be from Spain, but we say they're Spanish. They're not Spanish, they are speaking Spanish. But she was born on the Isle of Mallorca, which is part of Spain, the country of Spain, and her family, her mother and father, are Africans born in the only country that Spanish is the language of that particular country. That is Equatorial Guinea. But enough of that. As I said, all of this can be read in the fact pack here. Our display case, of course, shows you a lot. Some of this, and let me just tell you about this real quick. This drawing, it says transoceanic travel before Columbus from Africa to the Americas. Well, if that hadn't happened, perhaps we wouldn't have any Hispanics. We wouldn't have any Latinos. We would have indigenous people. Some of you call them Indians. Okay, they were here. We had some Africans that were here very early on, long before the Europeans got here. Over here, I just want to point this out, and then we're going to go to the musicians who are going to give you their take on the influence that Latin jazz has had on America. I traveled to Cuba 11 years ago, in 14. And it so impressed me that I came back. As you know, I'm a visual artist and an arts educator, but as a visual artist, I came back and I did a drawing. This is a print, a smaller version of the drawing. But here, notice the title, Little Africa in the West. This is the island of Cuba. This is Puerto Rico. I forgot to put Haiti and Dominican. Oh, so, here they are. I'm sorry. Dominican Republic and Haiti. This is Cuba. This is Puerto Rico. And of course, these are the Lesser Antilles. Those three women that you see up there were part of the folkloric dance and musical troupe of Cuba. They put on such a show for 2 hours that the group I was with the public that was watching, we just tore the house down in terms of applauding, and just everybody had a great time. But anyway, I hope that you will get some new light on the influence that Latin jazz has had, and some of the people who made the various contributions over the years. One of those people who brought Latin jazz to America was an American, Afro-American as you would call him, Dizzy Gillespie. When he brought Chano Pozo, Mario Bausa, and Machito, and Graciela, and the rest here from Cuba in particular, America has never been the same. But enough from me. Let's go to the videotapes. Thank you.
The American public appreciates Latinos and appreciates, especially back in the 40s and the 50s during the time of the Palladium. And then when I was playing a lot of Latin music back in the 70s and the 80s, there was like Latin music all over. And, in the Catskills, the Jewish people, my people, loved Latin music, and they all learned how to dance to Latin music. And it provided some, let's say some spice to their lives, because the rhythm is so infectious. And I think that Ricky Ricardo and Lucille Ball, I love Lucy, I think he was a catalyst to that, back, I don't know when they were they like in the 50s or 60s or something?
Yeah, late 50s, 60s when I saw them.
Yeah. So, it kind of, like I said, it provided a little bit of, spice to American people's lives. And then they really caught on to it. And, up in the Catskills, they hired so many different Latin musicians all the time, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, Machito, all the greats, were playing for the Jewish people, in the Catskills. So,
Right.
and, and the food is amazing also. Because, people, and there's one thing that we all know that everybody has in common. They all breathe, and we all eat all the time. So to eat the same old thing all the time is kind of boring. So, to have like a little something different in your life, is exciting.
Right.
I mean, when I was playing a lot of Latin music, there were all kinds of people in the audience. I mean, basically Latinos, and I do have to say something about, the term Latin music. It's not actually an appropriate term because it's kind of like an umbrella term for something that doesn't really exist,
Right.
I mean, there are many different rhythms that came from Cuba and from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and pretty much all over in that area. And, you would say, well, we're going to play a mambo. Nobody would say, let's play Latin music now. They would say, let's play a mambo. Let's play charanga. And each one had its style and its rhythm and its harmony and its melody.
Right.
Salsa is also kind of a watered down version of what the music is, but it was a term that, that people could understand and they could relate to, like if you say, no, we're not playing salsa, we're playing bomba y plena, they would be like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Oh, we're playing a
Clearly.
danzón. What's a danzón? It was just too specific, but
Mhm.
it was for commercial purposes.
Through the years, I was just excited about the music that Eddie Palmieri played, and the influence has been nationwide. The rhythms, the feelings, the styles of the music that he performed. He was a great pianist. The beats, the dance that also came with that music, with the Latin music and percussion, all different styles of percussion, using the bells, the bongos, the timbales, and the congas, and songs and movement and language. Music is a international language, and anybody from any place can enjoy it and understand the style of music that he was performing. I was just excited about some of the other musicians who were doing that also, Dizzy Gillespie and Tito Puente, Santana, so many of the great Latin musicians, Xavier Cugat. I used to listen to all of these, and Eddie and I were almost around the same age. He was born back in 1936. I was born in 35, so I'm actually little older than he is.
And
But
still here.
I'm still here doing my thing. But it was just a great experience through the years. And he and I started like in the beginning. I started a little band with the neighbors and with the young students in the high school, and
Mhm.
we formed the Kubats band, and we played all over. We went and played at the Apollo and all around Asbury Park and Neptune and Ocean and all that. So I was very excited about that, and I just he's just an amazing Puerto Rican uh, composer, arranger, and uh, keyboard player,
Mhm.
a pianist. Actually, he got 10 uh, Grammy awards, and he just it was just fantastic to hear and talk about him, and just so sorry that he left us here in 2025.
I think around 1930s to 50s, what you have a phenomenal Carmen Miranda. She's a woman, thinking about it, breaking into the market in the US. She becomes super famous. She's known the Brazilian bombshell, She's dancing, singing. She's in a Hollywood movies at the time, and I think she really opens the door. I think what's valid to say here is everybody says I want to be a pioneer, but being a pioneer is a payphone thing, you know what I'm saying? Because you have to deal with all the problems of people don't know who you are, right? So I think she laid it on. It's called like, oh, she's a little billboard stereotype or this or that. But I think in the end of the day, she is really the open door to the Brazilian culture around 1930s and 50s. She's in Hollywood movies, she's singing, and she becomes was the highest pay at some point in the US. Think about those things. It's just incredible. We know then the Brazilian music has this kind of sort of classic refined sound of bossa nova, and then I would say then this is a very unique and distinct contribution to Brazil. Obviously, we know that bossa nova came to the U.S. and those musicians got connected with the Latin sounds to the Caribbean, to the other countries. All of that was kind of happening at the same time. I'm just talking about the Brazilian track here. And I think the US was a useful place for also all the Americans to meet, right? And that was happening. I think other interesting things to say then, now João Gilberto and Tom Jobim open all these doors, and even later on, you'll have other Brazilian sounds coming. Samba begins with Carmen Miranda, but there is Baião, Chorinho, all these other sophisticated things, then is very unique for sound of Brazil. And I think it's important to say you cannot really separate the sound of Brazil without ignoring the African influence that became the Afro-Brazilian influence, right? A lot of those sounds that we're talking about here, there's a lot of influences of the north of the country, right? And then you have Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso, have other guys then come later, and they come from the north too. So yes, there were people in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, other people, but there was always this constantly exchange with the North. So you can't separate the African Brazilian sound. Is kind of the background of everything somehow. It's almost saying in the U.S. Where the jazz and blues comes from. I mean, you can't separate history of music in the U.S. by ignoring these two things, you know. So it's that cross, right, uh, um, connections, then I think it makes what the new world became in terms of representing, creating music, right? Today, what has happened, a lot of people like to go to Brazil and go to those places where the music started. They want to go to Bahia and other places to really experience the music created there. How is it represented on the street? People want to go to Brazil and see what samba is like and carnival in their manifestation. And capoeira is everywhere. Is in the U.S. Is everywhere. You know. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, this is important things. Not to say that Frank Sinatra also was recording, stuff with Tom Jobim. You think about Frank Sinatra music has this kind of sophistication, sort of bossa nova. There's really a bossa nova thing for his work with Tom Jobim. So um, yeah, I think music can be an ambassador, an art of so many things than politics and religion sometimes can achieve.
The Latin music has influenced the uh, American music in many ways because the Latin music is a very entertaining music. Anyone who have a soul, when they are listening to the Latin music, if you follow what they are doing, you will feel they are beating the beat with their feet, with their head, or they are dancing simply. Uh, the 1960, 1970, the Latin music has been playing in all the Caribbean countries, specifically Haiti, Santo Domingo until today, that the music that Santo Domingo is playing. But when you know music and you are listening to jazz music, to R&B music, to the country music in the United States, the rock and roll, the hip hop, if you know the Latin American music, you follow what you are listening, you will feel that there is a basis of the Latin music because uh, the movement that has been uh, happening between the American people and the Latin people, because, as you know, America was in Haiti, Santo Domingo, other country in the Latin America. Then they brought this music. When they come with the people from the Latin America, they come with the music with them. The same way the African American came with a lot of beat with them coming from America on the slavery time. That's the same thing that happened with the Latin people. They come in America, they play that very entertaining music, and when you are a musician, you're going to try to play this music. It is by trying to play the salsa, the Latin music, the American musician, they play the jazz, the R&B, because in order for somebody, for a musician to play a beat that is not in his culture, By trying to do that, they're going to find other sound because something is missing or they add something more. And that's the way the jazz, the R&B, the rock, the hip hop, the pop music come into birth because the Latin music has been influencing the whole America, including the United States of America. The compas in Haiti, it is coming from the salsa because back in the 1960 to the 1970 in Haiti, the music that they have been playing, the musician has been playing in the nightclub was the salsa. Even when they traveled to come in America, they came to play the salsa in addition to the rhythmic that they used to play. But it is one day that it seems the musician has been in repetition. They have been preparing something like a concert. And there was one guy, he used to beat the percussion, the tambour. And then he makes something, and the maestro say, "Hey, what did you do? Repeat it again." And he do it again. Beep, 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 pity, pity, pity. And they say, keep it there. And that from that pity, 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 that the compa has been created, but it was in playing the salsa, and somebody add one more sound, and then they found it was pleasing, and they keep it there, and that the way the compa was born in Haiti between the 1960 and 1970. This is a way to tell you that the Latino music has been influencing Haiti, Santo Domingo, the whole Americas has been influenced by the Latin music because this is a rhythm that is very entertaining. You can't hear this thing if you are a musician and you don't try to play it. And as I said, it is in trying to play the salsa, in playing the salsa, that a lot of musicians created other sound like the jazz, the R&B, the compa, the rock, the hip hop, and the pop in America.
So Latin music has influenced American culture for many years, um, going back to the bebop period, I think, and even before then, with the rhythms. Um, when anyone thinks of America, you think of people coming from all over the world to share in the experience of being free, and that freedom gives you an opportunity to express yourselves in many different musical genres, express yourself in science, things as engineering and things of that nature. Um, so all of those things coming together makes this country what it is. Um, One musician, I believe it was Wynton Marsalis, once said that when the music changes, the rhythm change, and there's innovation, that there's no innovation without a rhythm change. And when I think of that, I think of Latin music and how the rhythm of Latin music has changed American jazz, specifically American bebop. I mean, Dizzy Gillespie was just in love with it, brought about great trumpet players like Arturo Sandoval. Latin music, when you listen to it, it has a feeling of unity. It makes people happy. Um, when you visit a Latin music concert or jazz, and specifically, it just makes everyone change who they are. It makes them feel great. The music in the air, and that's what it does for me. And whenever you see someone playing salsa, or when you listen to salsa, or if you're at a dance, you got to move. I mean, it's a happy feeling. And I think that happiness transcends throughout every race, every creed, every color, every religion in America. It's just a beautiful thing. I had an opportunity to see Eddie Palmieri at the Village Gates many years ago, sometime in the '90s. But one of the great things that he did was he would open up solos for his musicians. He had this really powerful sound, and they would take some of the jazz standards, such as "All the Things You Are" and "There Will Never Be Another You," um, and they would have this powerful horn harmony in the background, and it would come a time where he would just open things up for solos, and the melody of the trumpet players, the melody of the trombone players. Was just great, and listening to that, I just loved that sound, and that was the first time that I had witnessed a performance by him in public. Um, Eddie Palmieri was a great musician, without a doubt. Um, I became closer to other musicians such as Arturo Sandoval and Chucho Valdez. Yes, Chucho Valdez, and one of the great Latin pianists. It's a beautiful thing. It makes America beautiful, and it just keeps people happy. And I'm glad to have known Eddie Palmieri, and I'm glad to be a person that loves Latin music.
It like took over New York at that point. You know, you kind of you really didn't have separate communities, but you had Harlem, you had Spanish Harlem, you know, but it was kind of a mixed community. But once Eddie brought that music in, it kind of brought both communities together. It was like one thing, you know, you go to a late night party or whatever, and it was half Puerto Rican. I guess there was Cubans mixed in, but basically at that point in time in New York, it was mostly a Puerto Rican community. And it just kind of took over. It was probably the biggest hit. I'm talking about, I guess this was like the early 60s. I couldn't give you an exact date, but it was kind of like the early 60s. And I guess it was the biggest music going at that point in time. What did they call it? Boogaloo was big at that time. All this was influenced by Eddie Palmieri too, and his brother Charlie. Eddie and Charlie were both big at that time. I think jazz influenced Afro-Cuban or Latin music first, because it seemed to come to the Caribbean before the Afro-Cuban rhythms came to New York. We had mentioned earlier Mario Bowser, who played in a lot of the big bands in that era. He was a Cuban, classically trained, but he was a big influence. He introduced the conga drum to jazz by way of Chano Pozo. It would be hard for me to say that jazz influenced Afro-Cuban or Latin music, or Latin music influenced what we call jazz. You know, they were both kind of part of the African diaspora. You know, just two different genres kind of coming together, but basically they were the same thing, if you ask me. You know, you had your basic melody, and both jazz and Afro-Cuban or Latin jazz was so much about improvisation. To me, it's the same music, different rhythms, but it's the same music. It's kind of hard to separate them. You know, like twins. You know, they're of the same family. But like I said, in my day, it was a huge influence all the way up into what we call the Boogaloo era, which kind of took place right before what we call salsa now, I guess, or Latin jazz. And Eddie Palmieri's been there through it all. You know, go back and check out his recordings. He had a band called La Perfecta, special stuff. And you know, he did a lot of protest music that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of, but he did a lot of protest music in the 60s. You know, this was the same era, I guess, as you had the Black Panthers and you had the Young Lords. again, cousins, twins, however you want to put it, you know, basically the same thing. Trace it. But I know I have roots in New Orleans, right? On my mother's side. And you just reminded me at the inception of what they call jazz, right? Coming out of New Orleans, they had something called Congo Square.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's still down there. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And Congo Square is where the slaves, the free blacks or whatever would gather
Right.
like once a week.
We're allowed to dance and recreate.
And, right.
Play
And
music.
of course, you had that big Caribbean influence at the inception of jazz with the rhythms, with the drums. Like I said, they've always been connected at the hip.
But Latin jazz is one of the greatest examples of how African culture pretty much shaped the world. Its roots go back to obviously Africa, you know, to its rhythms, the drums, the call and response that we hear in like salsa. You know, we get that from the call and response from the drumming that you know that happened in these earlier African rooted music. You know, carried across the Atlantic, you know, through the African diaspora, you can call it the Great Migration of music. When those rhythms met Spanish melodies and the indigenous traditions in the Caribbean and Latin America, a unique blend was begun to be, you know, created. Through this migration, especially to cities like New York, where these rhythms found new life alongside you know the jazz that was already in development here in America. Then that's how we get the birth of Latin jazz. It's deeply rooted in endlessly innovative and creative, but keeping at its pulse, at its very core, that African pulse, you know, while adding the improvisation and the harmonic richness of that jazz brings to the table. Great innovators like Eddie Palmieri, which you put on your flyer. That's the first thing I noticed when you put on your flyer. Together with Chucho Valdez as well, from Cuba. They pushed the music forward big time. You know, they showed the world that Latin jazz could be both intellectually complex, yet still irresistibly danceable. Groups like Africando, which also was on your flyer, they brought it back full circle, you know, reconnecting the way music just went out and about, and they just bring it right back, you know, that Afro-Caribbean rhythms right back to Africa, proving that this music truly belongs to the entire diaspora. What's more powerful and remarkable and is how universal it became, you know, from Dizzy Gillespie to Chano Pozzo's Afro-Cuban jazz to Tito Puente, Celia Cruz. You know, these people were filling up dance floors in the 70s and in the 80s. What about Carlos Santana when he brought it to the rock audiences? Um, you know, Latin jazz just crossed every boundary. It influenced salsa, funk, hip hop, pop, pretty much everything. Today, it's more than just music. It's proof that cultures really can come together, blend, and create something timeless that speaks to people everywhere. The impact of Latin jazz, it's global, but its heartbeat, that African rhythm, it still drives it.